The day of my parents' will reading dawned bright and cold, sunlight streaming through the mahogany-paneled windows of Wilson and Associates like a spotlight on a crime scene. I sat quietly in the corner, a ghost in my own family history, watching my brother Marcus. He was 34, draped in a $5,000 tailored suit, already pacing the room with the proprietary air of a king awaiting his crown. Miss Sarah Bennett, the lawyer's voice, dry as parchment, cut through the silence. "Are you ready to proceed?" I nodded, my knuckles white as I gripped the leather arms of my chair. At 32, I was the disappointment. While Marcus had climbed the ladder of Bennett Industries, I had wasted my Ivy League education on art history and restoration. Mr. Wilson adjusted his glasses. "To our son, Marcus, for his unfailing dedication to the family legacy, we leave the Vermont estate, the Hamptons residence, and controlling interest in Bennett Industries, along with a diversified portfolio valued at $400 million. Marcus didn't just smirk. He practically radiated triumph. Then came my pittance. "To our daughter, Sarah, we leave the oil painting Autumn Twilight, currently hanging in the study of our main residence." The room went deathly still. Marcus let out a sharp, jagged bark of laughter. "A painting? You get a piece of canvas while I get the empire? Don't worry, sis. I'll make sure there's a spot for you in the mailroom. You can help wrap the outgoing packages." I looked at the floor, the weight of a lifetime of being less than finally crushing my spirit. I was being left a single, dusty landscape painting, while my brother inherited the world. I didn't know then that the painting wasn't a consolation prize. It was a weapon. Before I reveal the moment Sarah discovers the secret laboratory hidden beneath the coordinates in the canvas, I have a question. Have you ever been given a gift that seemed like an insult, only to find out it was a treasure? Drop a patterns in the comments. I'm reading every story. The Bennett family fortune was built on 3 generations of industrial innovation, or so the public believed. To my father, John Bennett, a daughter was a social asset, not a professional one. He had spent my childhood grooming Marcus for the CEO chair while treating my fascination with patterns and restoration as a quaint hobby. "Sarah, a company is run on margins, not brushstrokes," he had told me when I chose art history over an MBA. "You're making yourself irrelevant." I had accepted that irrelevance. I had spent a decade in the quiet laboratories of museums, learning how to look beneath the surface of things. I learned that every masterpiece has a pentimento, an underlying image that the artist tried to hide. I learned that truth is often buried under layers of varnish and time. My mother, Catherine, had been the only one who understood. She was a quiet woman, often dismissed by my father as fragile. In her final months, suffering from what the doctors called a rapid cognitive decline, she would sit in the study and stare at Autumn Twilight for hours. "The numbers, Sarah," she would whisper, her fingers tracing the geometric shapes hidden in the painted forest. "They don't see the numbers, but you will." I thought it was the illness talking. I thought she was losing her mind. But as I stood in the empty study of my childhood home, taking the painting down from the wall while Marcus's new security team watched me like a thief, I realized my mother hadn't been losing her mind. She had been hiding it. I took the painting back to my cramped apartment. I sat it on my easel under a specialized UV light. And as the purple glow hit the canvas, the forest vanished. In its place, etched in a pigment that only reacted to specific wavelengths, was a map. The Bennett family fortune was built on 3 generations of industrial innovation, or so the public believed. To my father, John Bennett, a daughter was a social asset, not a professional one. He had spent my childhood grooming Marcus for the CEO chair while treating my fascination with patterns and restoration as a quaint hobby. Sarah, a company is run on margins, not brushstrokes, he had told me when I chose art history over an MBA. You're making yourself irrelevant. I had accepted that irrelevance. I had spent a decade in the quiet laboratories of museums, learning how to look beneath the surface of things. I learned that every masterpiece has a pentimento, an underlying image that the artist tried to hide. I learned that truth is often buried under layers of varnish and time. My mother, Catherine, had been the only one who understood. She was a quiet woman, often dismissed by my father as fragile. In her final months, suffering from what the doctors called a rapid cognitive decline, she would sit in the study and stare at autumn twilight for hours. "The numbers, Sarah," she would whisper, her fingers tracing the geometric shapes hidden in the painted forest. "They don't see the numbers." "But you will." I thought it was the illness talking. I thought she was losing her mind. But as I stood in the empty study of my childhood home, taking the painting down from the wall while Marcus's new security team watched me like a thief, I realized my mother hadn't been losing her mind. She had been hiding it. I took the painting back to my cramped apartment. I sat it on my easel under a specialized UV light, and as the purple glow hit the canvas, the forest vanished. In its place, etched in a pigment that only reacted to specific wavelengths, was a map. The drive to the Berkshires took 3 hours. I was followed the entire way by a black SUV, Marcus's men. I had to ditch my car at a trailhead and hike 2 miles through the woods to reach the coordinates. The property was an old, dilapidated farmhouse registered to Catherine Duval, my mother's maiden name. I found the storm cellar, its rusted doors overgrown with ivy. I entered the sequence from the painting into a hidden keypad disguised as a loose stone in the foundation. The doors didn't creak. They slid open on silent, pressurized hydraulics. I descended into a state-of-the-art underground laboratory. It was a pristine, white-walled sanctuary filled with servers, prototypes, and a wall of original patent filings. Every single innovation that had made Bennett Industries a multi-billion-dollar giant was here. But the inventor's signature wasn't John Bennett's. It was Catherine Duval's. Impressive, isn't it? I spun around. My father, John Bennett, stood in the doorway. He was supposed to have died 6 months ago. Behind him stood Marcus holding a handgun. "You're alive," I whispered, the world tilting on its axis. "Dead men don't get subpoenaed, Sarah," my father said, stepping into the light. I needed to disappear while the SEC was sniffing around our offshore accounts. The will was a filter. I knew Marcus would be too greedy to look at the art, and I knew you were too observant to ignore it. We needed you to find the codes for us. Your mother changed the encryption before she passed. We couldn't get in." "You killed her," I said, the realization dawning in my gut. "You couldn't get the codes, so you let her die while you searched for them." "She was a stubborn woman," my father sighed. "Now, Sarah, give us the final sequence, or Marcus here will show you just how fragile this family really is." They thought they had me trapped. They saw an art restorer in a dusty coat. They didn't see the woman who had spent the last 3 hours downloading a decade's worth of digital evidence onto a satellite-linked cloud server. "The sequence isn't a password, Dad," I said, backing toward the main console. "It's an activation code." "For what?" Marcus snarled, leveling the gun. "My mother called it the Clarity Protocol," I said. I slammed my hand onto the enter key, inputting the final string of numbers from the painting's hidden forest. The lab's lights shifted from white to a pulsing emergency red. A computerized voice echoed through the sublevel. Clarity protocol activated. Broadcasting composite data to SEC, FBI, and global news syndicates. Deletion impossible. What have you done? My father roared, lunging for the terminal. I've finished the painting, I said. Every stolen patent, every offshore shell company, and the proof of your faked death just went live to every major news outlet in the country. The Bennett legacy is over. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, not from my call, but from the lab's automated security system, which had just alerted the local authorities to a high-value fugitive on the property. The next 48 hours were a global media hurricane. The image of the dead John Bennett being led out of an underground bunker in handcuffs became the most watched video in history. Marcus tried to claim he was a victim of our father's manipulation, but my mother's files were thorough. She had kept recordings. She had kept logs of every time Marcus had forged her signature on a transfer of intellectual property. Bennett Industries' stock didn't just drop, it evaporated. The board of directors, facing total liquidation, was forced to make a choice: go down with the ship or accept a total takeover. I walked into the Bennett headquarters a week later. I wasn't there for my mailroom job. I was there as the sole beneficiary of the Catherine Duval Trust, which held the original legal patents for 90% of the company's products. The company belongs to me now, I told the board, not because of my father's will, but because my mother owned the ideas that built it. From this moment on, we are no longer Bennett Industries. We are Aurora Innovations. I kept the painting. It hangs in the CEO's office now, exactly where my father's portrait used to be. Marcus wrote to me from his cell, begging for a legal defense fund. I sent him a copy of Autumn Twilight. I told him to look at it closely. Maybe if he spent enough time staring at the patterns, he'd finally understand the value of things that can't be bought. I spent the next year returning what was stolen. My mother's lab became an incubator for young inventors who had been cheated by corporate giants. We established a foundation that bears her maiden name, dedicated to protecting the quiet minds that the world so often tries to silence. Margaret, our old housekeeper, came to visit me on the anniversary of the will reading. She looked at the painting and then at me. She knew, Margaret whispered. She knew you were the only one who could see the truth. I looked at the geometric shapes in the forest scene. They didn't look like codes anymore. They looked like a path. She didn't just leave me a painting, Margaret, I said. She left me a lens. She taught me that the most beautiful things in the world aren't the ones on the surface. They're the ones you have to fight to uncover. 2 years later, Aurora Innovations is the leading tech firm in the country. We don't just innovate, we restore. We've managed to reclaim over 200 patents that were stolen by the Bennett regime, returning them to their rightful creators or their estates. I was recently featured in Time magazine, not as an art restorer, but as the woman who rewrote the rules of corporate ethics. My father and Marcus are still serving their sentences, their names synonymous with the greatest fraud in industrial history. Every morning, I walk into my office and look at that forest scene. I see the triangles and the circles. I see my mother's hand. And I remember that in a world of varnish and lies, the truth is the only thing that never fades. The process of rebranding a toxic empire wasn't easy. I had to face a board that still whispered about legacy. I had to hire a new executive team that valued transparency over the quarterly report. I spent 18 months in the trenches, just like my mother had, except this time I was out in the light. We opened a museum of stolen art and science in the lobby of the headquarters. It serves as a reminder to every employee that ideas have a soul, and stealing them is a crime against humanity. My brother's former office is now the child care center for the staff. I finally found my own pentimento, the version of myself I was always meant to be before the world told me I was just a disappointment. I am the CEO, the restorer, and the daughter who finally understood the numbers. My mother's letter ended with a line I carry with me every day. Sarah, a painting is never finished. It just stops in all the right places. My family's story stopped in the cellar, but mine is just beginning. I've started a new collection of art, pieces from all over the world that have been recovered from the shadows. I'm helping others find their maps. As the sun sets over the city, casting an autumn-like glow across my office, I realize that justice isn't a destination, it's a pattern. And as long as I can see it, I will never be lost again. True legacy isn't what you're given. It's what you have the courage to reclaim. Sarah Bennett was a footnote in her father's story until she became the author of her mother's justice. If you're building your future on truth, you're already ahead of the game. Subscribe for more stories of ultimate justice, and I'll see you in the next one.